I will indeed focus on resilience and building back better. And I think the best framework that we have for that right now is a strong implementation of the European Green Deal, which in essence is a framework that is pushing us in the direction of fundamental sustainability transitions. And in this expert audience, I don't need to dwell too much on the context in which we are operating. You all know and are very much aware of the IPCC and the climate challenge. Increasingly, luckily, also in political and policy circles, the biodiversity and ecosystemic issues which are raised by IPBES are also important. Lesser known but equally important, I think, is the work of the IRP, the Resource Panel on Resource Use, and of course, human health and well-being are essential to any sort of sustainable future that we have. And if you look at these scientific consensus efforts, it's clear that we are living in times of urgency. We speak about a pivotal decade, that we are already dealing with irreversibilities in climate change that is called living in times of loss and damage, that we are seeing tipping points, I would say, not only in ecological system, but in socio-ecological systems, and that we are talking about a strongly interconnected set of problems. You could look at these also as sort of elements that are important for governance. And another overlay could be that we are dealing with a governance challenge in times of complexity, uncertainty, and serious risks. Now, looking at that is not only done by scientists and some people working on governance, it is also increasingly recognized by economic actors. This is the World Economic Forum risk assessment. And without going into details, but if you look at the last 12, 13 years, it becomes greener and greener. So also the economic and business world, based on this methodology, which you can question, but based on this methodology, comes to the same conclusion. Now, we all know that the response to these challenges at the European level is the European Green Deal. And the question then is this a paradigm shift in politics and policy? If you look at the targets and goals that are set, and climate neutrality, strong biodiversity, circular economy, zero pollution, which is a very strongly framed policy objective, but also then the links to our health, farm to fork, the social dimension, just transition, the financial system, and a new industrial future. You could say that this is indeed an agenda of an ambition level which we have not seen before. From a governance perspective, I think it's really important to recognize that this is not an environment and climate agenda for Europe. It's a broader political economic investment priority for Europe, with a very strongly embedded transitions logic, a link with sectoral policies of a very different kind. We are not asking them to become less polluting and more efficient with resources. We are actually asking them to reinvent themselves. It's strongly interconnected. It has longer time horizons, a strong link to the social dimension, which is increasingly not seen as a separate dimension, but an integrated dimension. And of course, the link with innovation, digitalization. So I claim it's also a governance agenda that is ambitious, innovative, interconnected, and requires systemic linkages. That is not what we are used to seeing in traditional government and governance. To put another layer on top of that, and now we are really talking about sustainability transitions, is that this is also a process of societal transition. And so the real question then becomes, how does this Green Deal contribute to well-being, not only in Europe, but also on a global level? How does it strengthen social capital and social cohesion, and how we can imagine our relationship as a society in a context where our ecosystems and our natural capital is further degraded? And to that extent, I would say that it's not okay that climate and environment are becoming part of the mainstream discussion. I think we should realize that they are the fundamental boundary conditions for the 21st century of any discussion on what we do in terms of economy and societal development. And that, of course, has a visioning part, but also an ethical number of considerations. We have indeed been launching a number of reports on that today, also recognizing that the current metrics and knowledge base that we have to understand this needs to be innovated in line with this socio-ecological challenge. And we today launched a report called Creating a Resilient Economy Within Environmental Limits, building on some of the work on systemic transitions that we have done. So it's time to finally do something about these things that is rather fundamental after many decades of theorizing it, because the fundamentals of systemic transitions go back 50 years in academic and research communities. Now, we recognize a lot of this in the European climate law. The ambitions are there, but if you look at this drawing, which is used by the European institutions, it refers to all sorts of systems that we have in the economy and that link us to an environmental context. So this systemic long-term approach that runs across systems is very much part of the climate neutrality trajectory on which we have put ourselves. The same can be said for another objective, the biodiversity strategy, which, in the words of our President Ursula von der Leyen, makes a link to physical and mental well-being, disease outbreaks, the European recovery, and the fight against climate change. This would not be the terminology that is used on nature objectives of the EU just a couple of years ago. And then the objectives of restoration and nature-based solutions are by definition of much more systemic and long-term perspective. The same is true for the circular economy package. By now, we know that we don't have a snowball's chance in hell, so to speak, to reach our climate and biodiversity objectives if we don't fundamentally move to a circular economy. It's an underestimated part of those agendas. The zero pollution ambition, which has a strong link also to the chemical strategy, is also an essential part. It is a high ambition that goes into all sectors of society, but also through its link with the chemical strategy, which now has as a mantra, safe and sustainable by design, pushes the system not into marginal efficiency gains, but into fundamental reinventing a sector that is underpinning so much of our economy, the chemical sector. You could say it is the industry of industries in many ways. So all of this is pointing at catalyzing systemic change. And so we focus at systems like the food system, the energy system, the mobility system, and the built environment within their natural context and limitations. And the goal is human health, well-being, and social cohesion. It's not seeing more economic output per se, seeing growth per se, seeing profits grow per se. It is the end goal is clearly human health, well-being, and social cohesion in Europe, but also in a relationship to a broader global context. And that requires transformative policy frameworks, but also crucial policy gaps. And the EU is addressing a number of them. You see them here, but one of them is clearly the social dimension. Without a strong social dimension, I don't think we will get there. Now, recognizing the scope of systemic challenges and transitions is a basis for better governance. And we refer to their deep character, the fact that there are no silver bullets to solve complex challenges, the focus that will be necessary on locked-in social practices and paradigms, and the understanding of barriers to fundamental change. And that can lead and inform a number of governance responses. It all starts, we think, with a strong vision, a needle on the compass, that includes fundamental reflections on what type of society we want, not just what type of economy or what type of innovation we need. Then embracing the systemic starting point, not as something where you have to make the bridges between the silos or the fragmentation afterwards, but starting from the systemic perspective. Then elements of policy coherence and consistency. It needs to be engaging with society, with strong implementation, with increased attention for scaling up and especially speeding up mechanisms. The current rate is too slow, with emphasis on what we should stop doing, and with a clear perspective on knowledge for action when it comes to the knowledge base. There are some elements that we have and know. You can go to the paradigm of wicked problems that looks at a number of elements that are extremely important for the current agenda. If you add to that the super wicked problem dimension, then we are dealing with problems where time is running out, where policies discounts the future irrationally, and I think we are in that stage, where those seeking to solve the problem are sometimes also causing the problem, and where there is a lack of central authority. So if we would look at those elements as an element of, as parts of a governance approach, that would be very helpful. Now, looking at the so-called X-curve of transitions, our intrinsic optimism leads us to this green line, where we experiment, we accelerate experimentation, and we stabilize at a higher level of sustainability. It's the red line that we think requires a lot more attention. What we should phase out, break down, and what we should move away from to speed up the breakthrough of the green line. And that's, of course, where conflicts will be in society and where we will need to come with enabling conditions. The social dimension should not become the next externality. It should be part of the solution of such things like phasing out fossil fuels, phasing out environmentally harmful subsidies after discussing this for 30 years, unsustainable tax systems, unsustainable spatial planning, often underestimated, but also, in my opinion, unsustainable inequality and living conditions. So from a governance knowledge perspective, we need to reflect on, what do we know about this? Do we actually monitor and follow that with our knowledge systems? And how can we integrate this more dynamic perspective on these two lines in our policy making? The social dimension is important, we think. Vulnerability, resilience, just transition are important words. They are often used now, but I think we need to recognize from a knowledge perspective that they are often underdefined. We have not really invested strongly in a knowledge base for that linkage. And they link us also to fundamental debates about distributional issues in Europe and beyond. So this is really important to invest in this from a knowledge perspective. Another element is speeding up. In the Green Deal, the red words refer to speeding up. They are all over the Green Deal. These are literal quotes, But we need mechanisms to speed up this transition. And that's where the first one, I think, is the essential. We need to organize the race to the top, And that doesn't happen in and of itself. You need governance for that, clear targets, timelines, mechanisms that force actors in a race to the top logic. That is where the benefit should be for those who are investing and part of the solutions. And that implies, from a cost perspective, moving to an investment logic. It's not a cost to deal with these issues, it's an investment in the future. Not investing in them, that is a cost. And so that's a logic that we should embed. This has all sorts of consequences for knowledge creation. We need to focus on knowledge that reflects the nature of the problem, super wicked problems, focus on co-creation between actors, and use the knowledge that we have as a more essential part of transition dynamics. What we should focus on is on complexity and the things that I've mentioned, but at the end of the day, the Green Deal can be the paradigm shift in politics and policy that we are aspiring for. And in this community, I think people have been aspiring for it for a long time. And can it be that? Yes, if we have an ambitious implementation of it, but it's clear that you cannot do it with public institutions alone and on a European context. This is a global set of dynamics, and we will have to continuously keep pushing the system towards that, because there are lock-ins and blockages that at this moment I don't think we focus enough on.